Mountain's always nervous, you know.
Yeah, I didn't prepare any introduction. Okay, it's
No
gonna
worries, bro. We'll get it on the fly.
be fun.
Yes, this is an.
Good to go. Here we are live. Hey, folks. I hope everyone is doing good and had a nice break a couple of minutes earlier. And we are back now for another masterclass with masterclass experts, I would say. They've been doing this quite a few times around Appium for a very long time in different forums. Could be a very familiar face in the testing community, I would say. It's none other than Srinivasan, Sekar, and Sai Krishna from ThoughtWorks. How are you feeling today?
Oh, we are like supercharged, Manoj. We were looking forward for this session. So I'm all in
Looking
it.
forward for it.
Awesome. That's a great start. And thank you so much for agreeing to speak at TestMu. And we're super glad you could make time for us and to hear all about what lies ahead in Appium 2. And I'm quite intrigued by the title Appium Endgame. Is it going to be, let's say, is it Thanos going away or what's in store? Are the slides going to be in Avengers theme or what is it?
I mean, we started to keep that, but not completely. But definitely the content is going to be like a end game and something to write up for us.
All right, cool, cool. All Marvel fans out there, if you're there, use your keyboard shortcuts 1, 2, 3, 4 to put in some emojis. And welcome, Sai and Srini. Stage is yours.
Thank you, Manoj. Thanks for having
Thanks,
us
Manoj.
over here. Thank you. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining our session. And like Manoj said, today we are going to talk about Appium 1.x endgame, and let's see if something is ending, something has to start, something has to rise, right? So let's jump in and look into that. Srini, do you mind sharing your screen, Srini?
Yep.
Okay, there
I
we
hope I'm
go.
sharing and I hope it's visible.
Yes, Srini, I can see your screen. Before we jump in, right, we'll quickly start with an introduction. So I'm going to start off with myself. I'm Sai. I work as a lead consultant with ThoughtWorks. I've been with ThoughtWorks for roughly about 7, 8 years now, and mostly I'm focused on consulting, enabling people within the org and also our clients. Uh, Outside ThoughtWorks, I'm quite passionate about open source. So when I started my career as a QA, I've sort of learned a lot from the community. And one way for me to give back to the community is I found open source and conference speaking. And outside of that, I'm also an active contributor to Appium, Selenium, a lot of other open source projects like Tycho, WebDriver.io, and I've also present in a lot of other international conferences like Selenium, Appium, Belgrade, Test Conference, Test Automation Days, and more to add to it. Yeah, that's about me. Srini, over to you.
Hi everyone, myself Srinivasan Sekar, and I'm a lead consultant at ThoughtWorks, and I'm an open source enthusiast, maintainer of Appium, contributor to various open source libraries like Selenium, WebDriver.io, Tycho, and a lot more, and a speaker and pair a lot with Sai on conference speaking and blogging. And here are our Twitter handles and GitHub handles. If you have any queries, feel free to reach us and we'll be active there. Yeah. And today we are going to talk about state of Appium, which is predominantly what lies in 1.x now, and what all improvements that we did in Appium 2.0, and what does it mean by drivers in the world of Appium 2.0, and what is what's that all about, plugins and CLI improvements on Appium 2.0, and how quickly we could test these plugins and drivers with the help of support libraries from Appium 2.0. And feel free to stop us anywhere and uh, give us a question, and we will be happy to answer. To start with, on state of Appium, Appium 1.x has been there in the market for quite some time now. I think it's been 6, 7 years, and we have seen so many 1.x releases, and the support has came to an end, and there's no active development happening in Appium 1.x, and Appium 2.0 is the way forward. And there comes the introduction of drivers and plugins in the 2.0 world, actually. So since Appium 1.x has been there in the market for quite some time, and Sai starting with installation, right? Appium 1.x installation. Have you faced any issues? And we have installed so many versions of 1.x for the last 7-8 years, right? So have you faced any issues while installing Appium 1.x? I'm sure there might be a lot of people here have their own issues with respect to installation of Appium. So have you faced any with respect to 1.x installation?
Yeah, definitely with 1.x installation of the server, Srini, is I have actually faced some real issues there, right? Let me take an example. When I was consulting with one of the clients, right, and there was a need for us to focus more on automation for iOS, so we were relying more on Appium as well as the XUI drivers, right, which Appium under the hood uses. But what happened was that being in a client location, there are a lot of proxy layers, right? And when we wanted to install, Appium server and 1.x server basically brings down a bunch of drivers, right? Along with that, one of the important drivers that also brings is Chrome drivers, right? So though in the current situation at that point for me, it was more to focus on iOS automation, but my installations are failing because it was trying to download a Chrome driver, and these proxies were blocking it, right? So ideally, I was blocked for like at least a week to raise tickets, unblock all these proxies to get my Chrome driver, right? And if you see over here, right, I was trying to download something and I was blocked for something which I'm not really going to use, right? In my case, it was purely focused on iOS automation, and then I was blocked for this Chrome drivers, right? But then later part of Appium, there were certain flags which was introduced by the team, to skip these kind of download checks and bits, right? I mean, I'm talking only about one case of Chrome driver. It could also be a Windows driver coming into or your UI automated to driver, right? So yeah, in those areas, I definitely saw those as well.
Yeah. So in Appium 1.x and the evolution of 1.x, we have a lot of drivers. Like we have Windows driver, Mac driver. We do support automating Windows native apps and Mac native apps. Apart from Android, iOS, and again two different backends in Android and iOS. Was there a need that you encountered that you would like to build your own driver for a particular use case that you have come across over the last 7-8 years in
Yeah,
Appium 1.x world?
Yeah, definitely, right? Because it's not always when you focus on automation, especially on the mobile side, right? Of course, like you said, the drivers, right? It's not always an Android driver or you're trying to automate an Android app or an iOS app or a Mac driver and parts, right? So they could because the way Appium was structured was the way the Appium was structured is there were possibilities for us to automate anything, right? So definitely being drivers, yeah, I did see a need where we would want to build custom drivers as well. So when I'm talking about custom drivers, to give an example of, so I bumped into a case where I typically wanted to automate a Raspberry Pi because there were some integrations on the IoT and the app part. So in those cases, yes, custom drivers was something which I had to build. And given that with 1.x, definitely it was a little tricky and complex. The whole reason being is because you need to speak to the core Appium team to get some changes in there to add your custom driver automation names and bits like that. And with that said, also one should actually understand the core module of Appium. So one should know internally how the routes are mapped, what is sitting where, and things, right? So definitely there is a massive learning curve for someone to understand the entire core of Appium. So with one, definitely we were able to build custom drivers, but it was not very easy. So you need to be very frank. It was a little tricky.
Yeah, I think anyone who built a custom driver over the 7-8 years might have really faced a tough time because they have to fork a lot of modules, because Appium as an org has so many no modules distributed across several repositories. So they have to fork a lot of modules, as you said rightly. It's a bit tough. I accept that. So with these in mind, that comes the rise of Appium 2.0. So Appium 2.0 came into existence in betas now for quite some time, where the main goal of Appium 2.0 is to provide better user experience for the users and also for the developer community around Appium. right? So as you pointed out rightly, one of the issue was about Chrome driver, whereas you wanted to ideally automate something on native iOS application, right? Wherein you are blocked in terms of installation, and then later they introduced a flag. Of course, Appium team went quite supportive for a long time. It's the time that we thought that it's really required for us to give what they ask for. So with Appium 2.0, you get what you wanted to get, what you wanted to try out. Let's say I wanted to automate an iOS application, so you could install just the iOS driver. Even myself face the pain of installing Selendroid driver. Whenever I install Appium, it comes with Selendroid driver. In the last 7-8 years, I have never used that. So which is something bulky, right? Which is definitely not my application under test on that platform, which I didn't want to use as well, right? So with Appium 2.0, in order to provide better user experience, Appium server is just a bare metal. And Appium server, apart from Appium server installation, you also have to install which driver you wanted to use for your automation. So if it is Android, you can pick whether UI automated 2 or espresso driver, and tomorrow you don't want UI automated 2, then you could just uninstall it and still work on XUI test driver, which is not the case in Wonder.txt. And again, the another pain point with Wonder.txt is, so they have to wait a long time for people to get the latest version of Appium if there is any bug fixes. So Appium server takes its own sweet time if there is even if a minor bug fixes. So when it comes to Appium 2.0, Appium, any of the automation backends that we have, if there is a minor bugs out there in the driver, whenever the drivers get bumped out with a new version, you could definitely go there and update just that piece of driver that you wanted to do. So you don't have to wait for Appium server to get released. So that's a reduction in terms of wait time. And another one, another pain that you were talking about is about creating drivers, right? So
Mhm.
creating drivers is really, really painful for a developer community. So to give better user experience and better developer experience, right? Appium kind of decoupled all the drivers. When I say when you get what you want, it's completely decoupled. So you could create your own drivers without without any knowledge about internal code bases of Appium, much knowledge about, to be honest. You don't have to touch the code base of Appium core at all. So you could maintain your own driver, create your own driver, and it can have its own release cycle apart from Appium server. Then you could instruct Appium server, hey, Appium server, I wanted to use XYZ driver. So Appium server will just pick that up. So that's how flexible the driver creations are. So the last bit of work ironing out in terms of documentation related to driver creation is in progress. So we could also see a driver custom driver creation documentation around that space as well. So it's going to be cool, right? You could maintain your own driver without much intervention of code or much knowledge about internals of all the node modules of Appium. Yeah, it's going to be cool.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, Srini. I mean, I see with One.x, some of the real pain points that I've seen, I can clearly see that we have solved that in 2.0. If I really understood what you're saying is all that we're saying is with Appium 2, uh, you get what you ask, right? So you're saying that Appium server is going to be very minimalistic, and what are the drivers that you need for your automation? We're going to ask that, but unlike in One.x, it used to pull a bunch of other drivers, but here, if you want to UI automated to driver. So you simply ask Appium, just give me the UI automated to driver as a part of the server, right?
Yes.
And even when you spoke about custom drivers, because I have myself built a driver in one, and when it comes to building a driver in two, which is completely isolated from the core modules, like you mentioned, so that also means we as a driver owner, so I can just build my driver provided I know what I'm going to drive things, right? So probably, let's say tomorrow I want to automate maybe my Xbox, right? So you're saying that I can build my own driver for Xbox and just plug it to Appium, and all our client codes would still be the same, right? Like create a session, find an element, right? Ideally, because Selenium, because Appium follows the W3C as per Selenium, so all the W3C specs would still follow, right, Srini, in the custom driver world
Yes,
folks.
exactly. You're
That's
right.
that's that's pretty
So,
cool, and I think that will really bring a lot of advantage to the community to build custom drivers as well.
yeah. So Appium plugins are again a small piece of code that works with Appium server, right? That's what Appium's 2.0's suite gifts are about. Have you faced any situation where you have to modify a command in Appium?
Mhm.
Sai?
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of places, a lot of cases, Srini, I'll give an example, right? I definitely see this could have been something where even in today's world, right? A lot of us who use Selenium and Appium, if we want to take some screenshots on certain commands and stuff like that, we try to add listeners onto the client side code, whether it's Java client or Python, Ruby, and parts of it, right? And given that this could have been cool if we could make some changes at one place, because if I'm working on a larger spread of teams, right? The same kind of implementation needs to be done in every client over here. But if this was a part of the server, the clients can simply not make any changes, independently to them, right? So that's one case where I've seen I really want to do that. And also some of the cases I've also seen is a different locator strategy, right? So by default, we know Appium gives something called like a driver dot find element by accessibility ID, right? Or probably something very unique to iOS or Android could be find by UI automated to or data matcher and things like that, right? But I bumped into a case where for a specific consulting client when I had, we had to build a custom locator. But given that custom locator, right, we really couldn't bring that into the code because it doesn't make sense for the community. It might make sense to that specific scenario in my case, but getting that as a part of the Appium core didn't make any sense because it was purely focused only to that specific problem solving, right? Which might not be what the community really needs. In those angles, right, I had to literally fork Appium's repo and maintain the fork, make the changes. And one other point was always keep ourselves with upstream and things like that, right? So yes, I have definitely bumped into these cases where I had to make some changes. I really want to make some changes into the Appium existing functions as well.
Yeah, so these are the problems that Appium 2.0's plugin actually solves it. So you could create your own command and override, as you said, probably creating a command through instead of find element by ID, you could do find element by image or so and so. So you could create custom commands, and then custom commands can have its own life cycle. You don't have to disturb Appium server at all. So you could, as like how we instruct XYZ driver exists here, you can also instruct Appium server, hey Appium server, I have XYZ plugin lies here, can you activate it, I would like to use it. So Appium server activates it, and then it respects the commands that you have built, and it has its own life cycle. So instead of driver talking to your application under test via the server running in the mobile device, you can
Mhm.
have plugin talking to the server running in a mobile device, right? So you could create custom commands, and you could also override, as you were pointing out, wanted to override on some cases. So you could override or rewrite the complete command of Appium. A command could be, let's say you wanted to have your own way of finding an element, so you could do that.
Mhm.
You could also let's say you wanted to take screenshots whenever find element gets invoked, so you could do that. So these are the use cases that Appium plugin kinds of addresses it.
Oh, that's cool, Srini. So along with this, so you're saying we can modify an existing function of Appium as well as we can override an existing function of an Appium, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And that's what these plugins can do.
Yes, you are right.
And along with that, is there can these plugins also enable us to create our own what do you call own endpoints, right? Own routes.
Yep.
apart
Yep.
from what is
So,
there in our W3C spec, right?
yeah. So one of that example is the same find by image, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
probably you could have your own endpoint, which is not even part of W3C standard. So we also have another mobile colon non-standard method. Same way we will have these kind of non-standard methods that works with Appium server.
Mm-hmm. Wow, and this is completely again decoupled from the core Appium model,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. So you could have
That's
it. I mean, Appium plugins can have its own versions. You could update the version without waiting for an Appium server to be released or Appium driver to be released. It has its own life cycle. It can be maintained by anyone in the community, open sourced or it's proprietary. And Appium kind of also has uh, core plugins that Appium team kind of maintains as well.
that's pretty cool. I mean, can you like explain us more about these plugins, Srini? How are these plugins? How does this plugin work in Appium 2, and what are the architectural changes that we have gone through to get these plugins work?
Yeah, as we all know, Appium 1.x is client server architecture. The architecture on Appium 2.0 is same client server architecture. So client can be of any language bindings that Appium supports. So we initialize a driver with bunch of capabilities or driver options, and then we will find an element, perform an action on an element, and then you will quit the driver, right? In a simple
Mm-hmm.
client code on any programming languages that we pick. It interacts with server, so kind of interacts with server, and then it also based on the capabilities that we have specified. Let's say I have mentioned UI automator, sorry, espresso as an automation name, so it will invoke espresso driver, send the command to espresso driver, and then espresso server gets initialized by the driver running in the device. So espresso server running in the device talks to application under test, and then it sends the response back to driver, and driver will send the response back to server and then to client. So all of these happens via W3C standard, which is a WebDriver protocol. So this is the typical flow when we have just drivers exist, right? So there will be two servers running, Appium server on your MacBook or your Windows or Linux, and then the mobile device or an emulator or simulator has its own server running, and the Appium server interacts with the driver, driver interacts with server running in the device, and then it interacts with application under test. So here comes the plugin. It's a small piece of code that could interact or fit into the Appium's life cycle. So let's say I have built a plugin and I would want to interact. I mean, I want it to be activated. So you can say Appium server activate this plugin. So Appium server while starting it gets activated. While starting it gets activated, and Appium server also knows, okay, if it comes with a new command, then I have to route that command. So let's say I have built an XYZ command. So client will send the XYZ command here. Appium server knows that because we have activated the plugin. Instead of sending it to espresso driver, it will send it to Appium plugin, which gets activated. Appium plugin can talk to espresso server, and it will send the response back to plugin and then to server and then to client. So that's one. Let's say I wanted to override the find element, because find element has been there in all the drivers that Appium maintains, right? It's a W3C, one of the route as well in the W3C standard. So in that case, if I want to override or probably let's say modify and add some other functionalities to it, let's say I wanted to have a screenshot whenever find element gets invoked. So it knows, Appium server knows, okay, plugin has something. So it will send it to plugin. Plugin will take care of the screenshot and then send the command back to espresso server. So go ahead, espresso server, can you find the element for me? So espresso server will interact, driver will interact with server, and then server will send the response back to driver and then to Appium server. So this is how the life cycle looks like. So Appium server takes care of routing either to driver or to plugin, depends on the command. If it is a new command, send it to Appium plugin. If it's an old command, it's a modification of old command, send it to plugin. Plugin will take care of whether I have to send it back to espresso server or driver based on what it is what it is actually implementing. So this is how it fits in. You can build your own plugin, release the version in npm, and again here is a simple Android architecture, but the plugins can be built for any platforms that Appium supports.
Cool. So can we like in very simple terms, Srini, can we say this plugin is more like a man in the middle between the server and the drivers over here with the existing drivers?
Yep. Yeah.
where if the plugin is registered, the server would know there's a plugin registered, and it knows that there is a command that it is sort of overriding over here, and it would ideally send the request first to the plugin, and then the plugin would decide whether to send it back to the driver or to the server which is running inside your mobile device, right? So that
Yes.
control the plugin can take care.
Yep.
Cool, cool. That's pretty very interesting actually. And this applies for both iOS as well as Android, right? So these plugins are
Exactly.
not restricted only for Android; it's for both.
Yes. So
Cool.
you can build the same plugin for both Android and iOS, or you could restrict the plugin to just work for a particular driver if we just interact with that specific driver. Let's say I wanted to build a plugin for extracting ADB logs.
Mm-hmm,
Although Appium has a capability, but I wanted to have a separate endpoint and get the crash logs on demand, right?
mm-hmm.
So I could build a plugin and just say this works only for Android. You can also mention and control that whether I'm supporting both Android or iOS or just Android.
Cool, cool.
And just in summary, so you could create your own command. Again, you could modify a command. You can also register your own routes, and you can also update the Appium server object before it start listening for the request, right? So that's about how Appium plugin fits into the architecture of Appium 2.0. Let's see a live demo of how does Appium uh, server looks like, how what kind of drivers we have, how do we install it, activate it, how does plugins look like, how can we activate it, and then we can have a simple demo on one of the plugin that we have built.
Sure. Okay, can you increase the size of your terminal streaming?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. A
It's
little bit more, please. A little bit. Ah, yeah, that sounds good. So Srini, when you initially started off saying Appium 2.0 is going to bring down very bare minimal parts to our servers, right? So is there any changes for us in terms of installing the Appium server compared to 1 and 2, or our installations are still the same?
installations are still the same since we are in beta for quite some time till Appium 2.0 is in a stable version. It's already stable, just that documentations and few more experiences is something that's been getting improved behind the
Hmm.
scenes. So we have to use at the rate next command to install it. Since I have already installed it, you can go back
Hmm.
and say Appium space if conversion.
Okay, so you
So like
have the beta 42 suite.
beta 42.
And with this said, right, Srini, when people who are using Appium 1.0, and when they want to move to Appium 2.0 from their installation side, what is the next thing that people should actually look at? See, installing the server is pretty straightforward, right? This is
Yep.
how exactly it was in 1.x. So once this is installed, and in 1.x, we would simply go ahead and start our Appium server, right?
Yep.
But with 2, you did say that this does not bring any drivers to us. So, but
Yes.
whereas in 1, the drivers were default, right? So this also probably would, raise a question to folks that, hey, if I want to migrate from 1 to 2 in terms of Appium server installations, what I need to look at, right? So, how do we get the drivers?
Yeah, you're right. So we could say Appium space driver space list. We
So
list
this is
down
a
all the
new,
driver.
so
Yeah,
this is
this
a
is a
new
new
CLI
command.
which is out. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So you see that these are the drivers that exist, but in our case, I haven't installed anything. So Appium server is bare metal, and I have the fake
Hmm.
driver. This is just for internal testing purpose. So we have just Appium fake driver installed in my machine. So you can
Hmm.
also install Appium space driver space install. Let's say I wanted to install UI Automator 2.
Hmm.
I could use this command and install. So you could also use Appium space driver space update if I have an
Uh-huh.
installed UI Automator version. So you could use Appium driver update and the name of the driver. It will help you to update the specific driver that you wanted to upgrade.
Sounds
And
good.
once you installed it, you could list down the drivers, so it will list out whether it is installed from npm or it's installed from your local machine. So let's say you are building a driver, it will also list out whether you have installed it from local machine, and if it is from a directory, it will list out the directory where you have installed it from.
Okay. Srini, see, when you said Appium driver list, right, it gave a bunch of driver names, right, like UI automated to XCUI, like what we see on the screen. So, are these driver names maintained officially by Appium?
So there are list of these drivers maintained officially by Appium. So if you have
Uh,
installed the, let's say, CDP driver, which is
mhm.
not maintained by Appium, so it will list out CDP and it will say whether it's from NPM or not. So it doesn't give you an external difference, but when you don't have anything, it will list down certain drivers that are maintained officially by Appium. Once you have installed a custom driver, you will not be able to differentiate whether this is maintained by Appium or it's maintained by Appium community.
Got it, got it. And Srini, sometimes, right, when I'm building a driver, and probably the driver is still in a beta version, and I'm still not comfortable to like sort of maybe publish it to NPM registry, right? So I still have my code kept in GitHub, and I'm actively developing it. But in that case, if I still want people to try out the driver which I've built, are there opportunities in Appium 2 to tell that, a driver which is not yet published to npm can still be installed and tried out by people? Is that
Yeah,
possible for us?
yes, definitely. You can specify the URL and from there you will be able to install it. Yep.
Okay. And when you say URL, you simply say appium driver install. You give it a URL, or you also need to tell the source from where I'm going to install it.
Yeah, you could also say the source where you want to install it from.
Okay.
It will
Okay.
install the source from
Sound,
there.
sounds good. Sounds good.
Similar way of
So.
drivers.
Mhm.
Yeah, so plugin works similarly. So it has community maintained plugins. It has also uh, Appium core team maintained plugin. So it will not have any differentiation whether this is maintained by community, this is maintained. We also have a documentation in master README. So we have drivers maintained by community. We have drivers maintained by core team. Same way for plugins as well there.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we could go back
Uh,
and figure out from there.
Sure, sure. And if we have to say people who anyone moving from one to two, watch out for the way you install your Appium server. So once you install your server, you also need to install the required drivers for us. Correct, Srini?
Yes.
Yeah, cool, cool. And how do we list out, right? The similar like how you did Appium driver list. So how do we know more information about the officially maintained plugins? And can you also show us how do you install one of the plugins?
Yeah. So Appium similar to list, you could say Appium plugin list. So these are three plugins that got installed. I mean, that's been maintained by community. Maintained by the core members. If you don't have any plugins, that's how it starts with. But you have a custom plugin installed, it's hard to differentiate whether it is maintained by core team or maintained by the community. Yeah. One better option is to go back to README and figure out.
Okay.
Same way you could install Appium space plugin space install. It's the way to install Appium wait plugin from
Mhm.
npm. So you could say
Mhm.
the source as npm, and then you could say this is the plugin I want to install, and it will just install the plugin from the npm. If you want to install it from local, you can also say Appium plugin. So, so this way you could install and uninstall gestures, and here you could say that source is local and it comes from my working directory.
Okay. Uh, so, I mean, see, we have installed a driver, right? You installed UI automated to driver, and you've also installed a wait plugin, right, which is maintained by the community. How do we use these drivers and plugins, Srini? Does this also change the way we are going to start our Appium server, right? In 1.x, we used to simply say, just type the keyword called Appium with some CLI arguments like port numbers and stuff like that, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, how do I even want to start this plugin or start load a driver, right? How do we do that with 2.0?
Yeah, definitely. So you could say Appium space server And you could say if you wanted to specify the timeout and base path, you could send those arguments command line. There's another way you could send a JSON or YAML if you could, because Appium server has a lot of CLI arguments, right, for servers. So you
Mhm.
could send the server arguments through JSON. You could just point out, keep everything in JSON, and there is a schema to it. Keep everything in the JSON, and then you could send that JSON directly here. Yeah. So this is how you could start a server. It will simply start the server. It doesn't activate any plugins. So you could see available drivers are, and there are no plugins installed as of now, so it doesn't activate any plugin. So another way to do is you can say Appium server. So another way to activate a plugin, let's say you have installed a plugin, you could use hyphen use plugins and get
Mhm.
and say the name of the plugin. Same way you could activate a driver as well. Let's say I have 4 drivers. I wanted Appium to start pretty fast with just the driver that I wanted. So you could say Appium server use drivers and then say the name of driver. It will start the Appium server with that specific driver.
Mhm. Cool. And also, Srini, with this, right? In Appium One, right? So we used to always maintain one version of the drivers. Is it possible to have multiple versions of the drivers in Appium 2? Because that
Yes.
also gives me that flexibility where one can choose what is the driver version they want to use in XUI itself, right? So probably you might have two projects that you're supporting, and you might want to have two versions of XUI in your machine. In 1.x, it was not possible, but are there any improvements around that area in 2.0?
Yeah, so we could set the Appium home, and Appium home kind of helpful for us. Let's say I have I'm going back to my root directory, and I could say Appium space plugin space list. So if you set that Appium home for a global, and if you set that Appium home on a particular directory to some other driver, I mean some other location. So I am in Appium wait plugin location now. I'm in directory. So if I say Appium list, so you could see on the root, I have 2 plugins. So if I start
Mhm.
the Appium server from here, it just told us that there's no plugins installed. If I start the Appium server from here, it will pick either of these two. If we say used plugins, then it will pick one of these. So
Wow,
you have
this
to
is
set the
really
Appium
a
home.
this is really a useful one in 2.0 for us. Definitely.
Yeah.
Cool. And Srini, with so many things which is changing around Appium, right? We've been talking about drivers. We're going to talking about plugins, right? And we know that there are some drivers which is officially maintained by Appium team, and there are some plugins which is officially maintained by the Appium team, right? So could you could you simply run that command for me, Srini, again, the Appium plugin list, right? So the whatever this turns out to be, so this is like the official plugins which is maintained by the Appium team, right?
Yes. So these are
And
the
similar
plugins
for
that gets
uh
listed out when you don't have any plugins at all. So
mhm,
that comes from the Appium world. I mean, those are maintained by Appium core members, and we have built some plugins ourselves. So once I have installed it, you will also see these are the plugins that, okay, you also see gestures coming from local and element weight coming from npm source. So these are
mhm,
plugins that are installed from different sources and are maintained by community. And from here, it's hard to differentiate, but you could always refer to readme and then find out the plugins that are actually maintained by the core members.
sounds good. Sounds good. And do we know that what are the plugins that we have currently, which is maintained by the community, right? I mean to say, you very clearly called out by listing a Appium plugin list. We don't know, but looking at some of our community-driven work, issues coming in, people asking in forums. So, what are the kind of plugins that we've already have built by the users?
Yeah, so the top one, images, relax caps, and universal XML are the plugins actually built by core members. And the below one, which is Appium Weight, Device Form, Gestures, and Dashboard, are purely from the community. So these are some of the list of available plugins, and we also have Appium Report plugin, which got released yesterday. So these are bunch of plugins maintained by community.
Sweet, sweet. Okay. That's pretty good. Actually, I see that even before, 2.0 coming out of beta, and we still see a lot of traction towards, a lot of plugins also getting built by the official, Appium dev team as well as by the community, which is really nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
And
Appium
Srini,
also.
yeah, with that said, right, we spoke a lot about plugins and parts. Do you have something for us to show on your any one of the plugin which gets activated, and how that plugin would, sort of register to the Appium server? Can we see something in action in those angles?
Yeah, yeah,
Do you have
sure.
something for us?
So I have an Appium Weight plugin, and along with plugins, Appium also has provides us a way to test these plugins and drivers using fake drivers and fake plugins. It gives us an harness where you don't have to spin up an emulator or simulator and then starting an Appium server, installing the plugin, registering it, and writing the whole piece of code to test it. So you could use the Flake plugin and use the plugin harness provided by Appium, which helps us to spin up the fake plugin and fake plugin and fake drivers, and install your own plugin, activate it, and it will help you to do all of these life cycle without starting an emulator and using an UI automator or espresso or so. So I have a simple test here, which will so the test is all about the Appium Weight plugin. So Appium Weight plugin on a high level, what it does is instead of we adding so many weights inside your code, Appium Weight plugin is smart enough to know that if it finds an element, it waits for it by itself, and then with some specific conditions, it waits for it and then performs a if it doesn't come up, it keeps on polling and then comes out until you can also tune these frequencies, tune these seconds, how long it has to poll, and all of those, how many attempts it has to do. So instead of writing a clumsy code where we have to start an Appium server and uh, start an Appium server and then writing so many waits for every navigations or every refresh in screen. So you could use Appium Wait plugin and remove all those wait statements in your code. So Appium you start the Appium server with this plugin. It helps you to remove all the clumsy wait statements that you have. So because it has its own smartness, the code looks much better on the client side. And client side, you could also start this plugins programmatically. So there are programmatical way of starting the Appium server, right? So along with starting the Appium server, you could start the plugin as well while starting the Appium server programmatically. I mean, activate the plugin as well. So I have a simple test here to showcase how we could test a plugin and how does it complete. We could also this is an end-to-end test. So Appium gives us a functionality called the plugin end-to-end harness. If we say these are the plugin, this is the source of the plugin, this is the source of the driver, this is the server arguments, then it kinds of installs the plugin if it doesn't, if you haven't installed already. So it kinds of installs it and then starts the server and then runs the. I'm using a WebDriver IO here. So let's say I wanted to find an element here. So it goes to plugin, then the weight goes there and then comes out for us. So let's see this in action. So we'll be able to. So you could see the weight statements. The Appium home has been set here. Okay, let it complete. We'll come back there. let's start from the top. So you could see Appium Home has been set here, and it uses its own temp directory, and it also checks whether driver called fake driver. As I said, it's not going to use UI Automator 2 or Espresso or XUI. It uses a fake driver, and you could install the fake driver. And if it is not installed already, it installs it, and it says install the fake driver, and it checks whether the plugin is already installed. Otherwise, it will also install the plugin for us, and it uses the port number 4723, which is which is where the Appium server been asked to start. You could see here the test port is 4723. So Appium kind of got started here. You could see here this is the available plugin, and it got activated, and the available driver is fake driver, right? So the Appium server started automatically, and it uses Appium fake driver, and it uses plugin, and it activated it. And these are the capabilities that got passed up. So the platform name is fake, automation name is fake, and we have the XML here, source here. And if you scroll down a bit, you will see wait plugin. Yeah, here you go. So the command came in here for find element to the fake driver, and then Appium's driver says plugin which can handle command find element is element wait, because we have activated the plugin, so it knows. So plugin element wait is now handling command find element. So the command moves to wait plugin instead of fake driver. So you could see there are some properties that we are setting. Timeout properties not set for this session, trying to set one, and then element location is taken care. Element finding is taken care here. For example, the element finding is taken care here using CSS locator strategy for alert button selector phone. You could go back to our code and see that you could see that driver dot dollar, which is in WebDriver IO, it's find element which uses hash alert button, which is basically trying to identify an element using CSS locator strategy, which is what happened there. So this is how the control gets passed over to fake driver, and then it comes out to Appium driver, and then uh, it goes forward. So so we have ran an Appium test without any emulators, simulators. We use fake drivers, and then we'll still be able to find an element using element wait plugin. So that's on action how element wait plugin or plugin in general works.
That's pretty cool, Srini, on the way the plugin takes control about the default Appium server. I mean, that's a very neat way that 2.0 is exposing things for users to build these plugins as well.
Yeah.
And also definitely the another thing that I really liked is just not enabling people to build plugins or drivers, but also enabling the developers to write test in ease, right, by exposing all these test support which Appium internally uses, like plugin ETR harnesses and stuff. That is definitely a good thing that 2.0 exposes, so that the custom drivers and plugin developers can also write good tests around that area. That's a really cool thought which the team has put through there. Yeah,
Yes, exactly. Otherwise, it takes its own sweet time to start an emulator, and then writing an end-to-end test. It's much painful in terms of
right.
writing end-to-end test. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. 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 Okay. What else do we have in store, Srini, for us? Oh,
Yeah, these are the some of the drivers. That's again similar to plugins. We have some of these drivers maintained by community, like Alt Unity driver, Chrome Drive Tools Protocol, Roku UI Engine. These are some of the drivers that are maintained by community. Apart from the UI automated tool driver, Espresso drivers, those are drivers maintained by Appium core members. Yep. So that's and benefits on a high level, decoupled architecture, plugins, pain points around driver installations, updating driver installations when there is a bug. Just go forward, update the drivers whenever it get released, and custom commands through plugins, and yeah, custom drivers too. That's about.
It's awesome. Thank you so much, people. Thank you. Appium 2.0. So thank you so much for attending our session and being patient to listen to us.
Awesome. Wow. That was so much content. Thank you so much for
I'm
sharing,
open
Sai
for
and
some
Srini.
questions now. My
Yes, I think there's a network
do
lag.
we
Yeah.
I think Sai is
have
asking if we have
time
any
for
Q&A.
questions, Manoj?
Yes, there's quite a few questions. There are over 250 plus people tuned into this talk, and there's a lot of comments and questions that came through. All right. So, my first question to you both would be, obviously, you'd be heard about the developments
I think my
happening in the
browser is
Selenium
like
world.
slowly dying now. Srini, are you able to hear me, Srini?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear
Yes.
Manoj very well.
Yeah. Is it better now for
I can
you?
hear you clearly, Manoj.
Yes. Okay, Sai. All right. So my question is, hopefully Sai is also able to hear. My question is, I'm
Oh, you
sure
can hear
you'd be
Manoj.
hearing about Selenium World, and
It's
when
me who
when do you
can't
think
hear.
we'll be able to run Appium 2 tests over Grid 4?
That's a great question. So we haven't started around. We haven't performed any active development around Grid 4. I mean, Appium supporting Grid 4. Again. Um, there was discussions around it, but it's not yet active. Still being able to run the test, but officially supporting Appium Grid. I mean, Selenium Grid 4 is something that's in the backlog, which is not yet picked up.
Cool, cool. You could come on video if it's possible, Srini, so that we'll make
Yeah,
it more interactive. I'm guessing Sai has some issues on network. I can see that it shows some red marks.
yeah.
Hopefully, Sai can hear us. And cool. So, time to pick up some question from the attendees. Okay, let me pick. It's a question from Abhinash. What are the major areas to focus on while performing end-to-end mobile testing?
Yep. If I believe it's on functional. Um, so you could focus on the key areas that is wherever native features were involved, and try to have as minimal tests as possible on the tip of functional tests over while running it over the device, because it does takes its own sweet time, right? Try to have the complete functionality tested in an integration test, and have as much minimal as possible on the tip of functional scope, and wherever there are native mobile features coming in, let's say Bluetooth, or if I wanted to do face unlock, so yeah, try to have as much as possible out in that space.
Got it. Got it. So quick check on Sai. Sai, are you able to hear us? Okay, seems like still very unfortunate. Otherwise, I know he'd be love to answer some of these questions. But nevertheless, next question is from Manish on there are so much developments in the browser automation space, like Cypress, Playwright, Puppeteer, Tycho, a lot of them. But when it comes to mobile testing ecosystem, what are your thoughts on the ecosystem. There's Appium. Are there any other tools, Srini, that you think that people are using? Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, in terms of functional automation, Appium has been able to be on top of market for quite some time. There were tools coming in, came in, but were not able to be there as like Appium for cross-platform support. And we still have Espresso. It's been heavily invested by Google, and XUI has been used heavily in native app development. And now new kid in the market, probably a little old. Flutter has its own integration test package over on top of the Flutter driver that got deprecated some time ago. So yeah, I think we have good tools for natives that are maintained by Android and Apple themselves. When it comes to cross-platform, Appium has been able to do excellent job by whenever there is a bug. So Appium was able to patch it and release it in a much neater way so that the client codes are not getting impacted around that space. So which is something that's very helpful when compared with other tools. So even when you take a Flutter driver and integration package, there is a minor change in terms of the way how we interact with the app and how we write our code. But it's not the case with Appium so far in the last 7 8 years.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks for sharing those insights, Srini. There we go. Sai is back.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes, I very well. Thank you.
Cool. It
All
was
right.
not just Appium's 1.x Endgame, it was my system Endgame as well.
Got it. Got it. All right. Maybe now Sai can take up this question, or open to both of you. An interesting question from Abhilash. Although Windows app testing is very minimal lately, we are one of those companies which still have legacy systems, and we're facing uncertainty because WinUp driver is not actively maintained. Any light on that matter?
Yeah, actually, WinAppDriver is not actively maintained by the Appium dev team, and it's maintained by the Microsoft team. And I remember there was a thread which was floating from one of the managers who's from Microsoft who's managing the WinAppDriver. They said they're going to actively look through it and things like that. But I don't know how far that went. But definitely, the Appium devs team is not maintaining the WinAppDriver, and it's with Microsoft. So I'll try to fetch that GitHub issue and probably post it across so that people can go give more thumbs up and show interest so that Microsoft can come back and keep the repo active.
Got it. Got it. Cool. Um,
There you
Another
go. Srini's got
question.
that. Srini has
Link. Yeah.
pinged that link here.
Perfect. Cool. Srini, actually, you have pasted on Q&A panel. You could paste it on the chat, or we could do that. No worries. All right, let's get into the next question that we have. I'll let you read yourself. I'm sure you'd have been a consultant at ThoughtWorks. You have been under the same, had for a long time. Many situations you'd have been crossed.
Build versus buy is a heated ongoing debate. What do you guys suggest to do for a mid-sized gaming company like ours for mobile app testing? So not sure what is the right SDK that you are using behind the scenes. It's not an Unity driver. I assume it's not an Unity driver. So if it's not an Unity driver, I suggest to build your own driver and open source it. This community might really look for any drivers that could help you to test a gaming app. So if it's a Unity driver, we have one which is already been maintained. So feel free to go ahead and contribute out there. So it will also get a lot of traction. So quite recently, there was a talk as well on Unity driver in Selenium Conf. So you can contribute and get this more traction and maintained in community as well.
Cool. Thank you. Next question is from Soumya. I think during the session, I think some parts of it you already covered. But if you both would have to summarize for the benefit of attendees on, okay, I know there is a lot of things happen architecturally on Appium 2, but as a user, imagining I have so many scripts already written on Appium 1, what are the things that I need to be taken care of?
I'm going to split this question to two, Manoj. One we'll talk about from a server point of view, and one from a client point of view, right? So, from an Appium server point of view, like in the sessions we covered, right? So, you install Appium server, you get it's just a bare bone. So, what all drivers you need to install. So, if your automation script, like your CI is already installing a server and it's got, once you upgrade it to, you basically need to have an upgrade script in your CIs to also not only install Appium, but also get your drivers onto it. Along with that, you also need to tell Appium to activate your drivers, right? If not, it's going to activate a bunch of drivers for you. So there could be, from a server side of point, purely from installation and activation point of view, there's only like two or three things, right? Along with the changes what the server is doing, there are also clients getting moving, to support too. So definitely, there are some changes that you need to look through a client, right? I'll give one example over here. Probably I'll give two examples, right? One, maybe with 1.x, you might have a minimum version of Node could be 14, but now we are strictly saying it's Node 16 and npm 8, right? So that will be a change for you. So if as soon as you update to 2, one thing you need to keep in mind is you need to have your CIs, your own machines, to have this right Node and npm versions from a server point of view. When it comes to the client point of view, again, most of the clients are also making changes to adopt to 2.0 changes, and there's already a migration guide for Java client, and I think even Ruby out there. And previously in 1.x, you never used to have something called as base path. It used to already always be wd/hub, right? We used to say that, but now it's configurable. So if you have your scripts which is starting a server without that, it would fail. But now with two, you will have to add that, right? So I would say not many changes from a server point of view, but depends on which client you are using now. Based on that, you might have some changes to be taken care. And that's why we, from a community point of view, we are telling users to please start using Appium 2 beta now itself, because though it's termed beta, under the hood, the implementation and the way the drivers are working are the same. There is no changes. It's only from an architectural point of view, we are enabling the community to build custom drivers or build plugins, and these kind of opportunities are opened up. So the beta tag is still there because there's a hell lot of documentation which is supposed to be completed.
Awesome. Thank you. Perfectly summarized. I think this can be easily converted into a blog post, and I'll reach out to you shortly.
Sure, Manoj.
Cool. I think we are actually slightly overshoot our time, but I just want to ask this question so that you can, both add your points around it, and then we can end the session. Um, so of course, this question already came in at many forums. So, if someone is looking at contributing to Appium, where and how they should start? And given Appium 2's architecture is plugin based, it's actually a lot more easier, because if I want to add some feature, I can. If I all I just need to know is how does a plugin work and how can I, do that. And if it's solving a larger problem part of the community, and I think you folks committers can help them, adopt within the project. Is there any plans or any discussion around it? So there's two parts to it. One around how someone can contribute, and if the plugin is solving a problem for larger audiences, is there a way where you could adopt the Appium community can adopt it, committers can adopt it, and will there be any support from your side?
Yeah. Srini, please add as I'm, putting in points, right? Manoj, to answer to your first question, right? Where can people start to contribute, right? Like any other open source, people would say documentation. And I just finished saying Appium 2 is still in beta is because documentation there's a bunch of documentation work to be done. Okay. So
There you go.
I would want people to come contribute to this community. To start off is a documentation place, right? Because the reason, I've also heard Manoj you talking in Selenium conferences, right? It always starts off with documentation. I would probably want to emphasize a bit more why it is so important, right? There is no documentation right now. There's very limited documentation, right? Whatever Srini and myself we have just talked you through, there's nothing much on the documentation. If you go even hunt over the internet, maybe there might be some blogs written by us or few other folks. And if you go to Appium's pages, you might not find any documentation. The way we are able to like sort of chalk down these things in conferences and share with the community is because we're looking at the code, we're looking at the issues, we're looking at pull request, right? So when you come forward to write the documentation, ideally, even for you to successfully write a documentation, you would actually want to go read the code, right? What the code is doing. So you need to understand under the hood how Appium works. So when we say come contribute to documentation, it's only not about writing paragraphs of stuff how an Appium is working, but you'll have to literally understand the entire route, right? So there's a massive opportunity for someone to understand the internals of Appium when come forward to contribute to the documentation part. And the second thing is, Manoj, you asked.
Just around, so you said around, obviously completely resonate with that, and they need to understand the code, and then only then they'll be able to add some meaningful documentation around it. But is there a place where they can hang around with contributors like you? Because if I'm reading a code, if I have some questions, I have to get clarified from committers like you, right? So is there a place where I
Yeah.
can come and chat with you?
Yeah, we have a Slack channel, Manoj, and the Slack channel is a closed group, and but people are welcome into the Slack channel who really is interested to contribute. And that Slack channel is only to developers or contributors who really want to, like you said, right? They have doubts. We want to sort it out. We want to clarify. So that's a forum, and that's been actively, maintained there. And if anyone wants to, contribute but need help from contributors, so please reach out to me and Srini. Will be more than happy to onboard you onto the Slack channel and we can take it up from there.
Yeah, just to add on to Sai on ways to contribute, another thought process about encouraging community is to come up with a template where people can start from that template if they wanted to create their own drivers, for example, or plugin, for example, and with some detailed steps. So we have some documentation around it, but having a specific package in GitHub and start from there, just a bare minimum piece of code, so people can go ahead and use the template as a bare minimum backbone for it, and start contributing in terms of plugins or any interesting problems they wanted to solve it through plugins.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now to the second part of my question around plugins, if you would like to add some points.
Yeah, so we have some kind of documentation around that, and it's getting outdated every now and then, because if we follow the plugin documentation in Appium 2.0 docs, it probably will not be able to build a plugin at the moment, because we are ironing out a lot of things. So coming up with problems and then solving it, okay, it seems much better with too many discussions going on in issues, and can we place it this way, can we do it this way? So now comes, I mean, different plugins have got that we have built brought in different kinds of issues. So there is some kind of overall happening, but obviously you can look for those plugins that are maintained by us, like element weight, device form. So it will be really helpful. So you could look for those piece of code, and it will hardly doesn't have much around like how Appium as an org has in too many node modules. It's very easy for us to understand. So you could start from there. That will be really helpful, and then you can come back and contribute for documentation. So it's win-win for both.
Awesome, awesome. I've just put it on chat to gauge some interest if Sai and Srini is willing to run a day-long workshop or half-day workshop around how to build plugins. With all of you listening to the talk, would we be interested? If yes, yes, please reach out. We'll be very much happy to set the stage for Sai and Srini to run that workshop for the community, especially for the community, and so that you can understand how to develop plugins, and it's a lot more easier now. Okay, with that, thank you so much, everyone who's been patiently listening to this masterclass on RPM. It was truly a master class, just like Sachin's master blaster. Thank you so much, Sai and Srini, for the talk. And
Thanks,
as usual,
Manoj.
this session has been recorded and also live streamed on YouTube. There are over 250 people live attending this, and thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks a
Thanks.
Manoj.
lot,
Thank you
Manoj.
so much for giving us that opportunity once again. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I
Always,
really
always very
liked,
nice.
yeah, thank you so much. And I really loved the folks on the call. The chats were just flowing so energetic. And I kept looking at it, right? And I felt like I need to talk more about the plugins. Okay. And Manoj is like, yeah, we have 5 minutes left. I say, yeah, yeah, okay, cool. Let's do that. Thank you. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for
thank
joining
you so
tonight.
much for
Thank you
staying
so
there.
much. Bye bye. Good
No
night.
worries. As I
Take
said,
care.
we will follow it up with another workshop.
Yeah, sure. Lovely.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye bye. Bye.